Greetings, one and all. You can call me AB, and first, I just want to introduce you all to a new series I'm starting, um, primarily centered around D&D content creation. Haven't yet to name it, but eventually I'll get to that. First, I just want to introduce you guys to myself and share my experiences. My first introduction to Dungeons and Dragons, which is by far has turned into my favorite pastime and passion, was from my friend Adam. Uh, it was, I think it was like either my freshman or like my sophomore year of high school. My best friend Joe was like, "Yo, Adam's running a D&D campaign. Do you want in?" And this is back in the day with 3.5. And I was like, you know what? Might as well try it. The campaign lasted for about a year, and I played a sorcerer named Volkazar Grandsteel, who was an orc, who was an orc sorcerer who got raised by a dwarf, and I fell in love. That campaign single-handedly sparked my love for this game. It really did. Unfortunately, like most campaigns, it did fizzle out, and it was really sad. And for a long time, like years passed, and I hadn't played D&D for a long time. I was still friends with all of those guys: Adam, Joe, Logan. There's just a ton of people that I still know to this day. Like, I made a lot of great friends from that campaign, that I'm still really close with today. But we just never played. I did a couple of one shots, and I did a kind of a mini campaign in 3.5, but nothing that really transferred over. And then eventually, about a year ago, we all started getting really into D&D. Adam started a new campaign, and so did my other friend at the time. And I was getting a lot of it, and I really got my feet wet into 5th edition, which is when I started reading on the books and got pretty heavy into it. And then the campaigns started to die out again, and it's a tale as old as time that happens a lot. I mean, we've all been there, especially if you're watching the video. You probably definitely have played at least in one campaign, I hope. But so the campaign originally started as just a kind of break, whenever the other campaigns weren't running, we'd play mine. And then it went from one session to two a month to 3 a month, and now it's pretty much turned into almost every single week we play Dungeons and Dragons. I'm very blessed. I understand. We play 8 p.m. on Sundays to midnight, and it's a riot. I have fallen in love. It's been about a year now since we started, and the reason I'm making the series in general is I just want to create videos. I think it's fun. It's always been something I've wanted to do. And also, it's going to be more of a series to try to inspire other dungeon masters, or just people who think that being a dungeon master isn't for them. And it's also going to try to help me consistently plan and try to keep fleshing out the world that I'm making for my game, which I personally love to do. But I'm going to try to hope and pray to post every week or so, or at least every week we have a session, just that way there's more content and we can go over what's happening per session. So with the introductions out of the way, let's go over the session recap. The party is currently deep inside spore and fungi-infested ruins of what was once a dwarven outpost, deep in a volcanic mountain range, steeped with insect creatures and biological hazards. Fiddlethump, the group's wild magic fey halfling barbarian, entered a room with a pulsing blue crystal that looked like it grew out of the ground. The pulses almost mimic a heartbeat in their consistency. The players have found a number of these crystals in the dungeon so far, and have come to the conclusion that they need to break them all at once in order to release a curse binding some manner of horror they found in the upper levels of the dungeon. Upon describing the chamber before them, knee-high with bleached bone and the smell of mold, with ceilings around 20 feet high, it appeared to be some manner of dining room or living quarters for the long-forgotten residents who once inhabited these halls. Fiddlethump approached the crystal and decided to touch it, causing the bones to vibrate and begin pulling together, eventually forming a mesh of mismatched bones in the shape of a dragon filling the majority of the room. The bones left empty sockets for eyes with very dimly green-lit sockets. And as the dragon breathed, a cloud of spore to follow, while green liquid started to drip from its mouth and leave pools. This is where my party picked up the session, and it was an epic boss fight. I'm happy with how it turned out, and one of my players literally suplexed that dragon straight into the ground after growing to about 18 feet tall. So, how did I get the concept for the fight? Where would I get the stat block for this? How could someone recreate something similar? And what if the party never touched that crystal? These are all very valid questions that I think a lot of people clog themselves with when they're beginning to plan. So I'm going to try to address some of them. More importantly, I think you have to ask yourself before you even get to the creation process, or let's say if you're trying to mimic this setting, you have to ask yourself, what is the situation? And just remember, as a dungeon master, you can literally do whatever you want. The rule of cool dictates as such. Also, the Holy Relic, which is the DMG, I fucking love that book, tells us so. This game is meant to facilitate dope adventures. Please go create that. It's so fun. For my campaign, I wanted to give my players choices and the freedom to explore a world that is compelling, alive, and unique. In the region that they're in, there are several areas that would be considered dungeons similar to this. And that is, well, this is the first of those areas. I don't have them all planned out, point blank. I didn't have this one planned out. Honestly, I didn't really start planning this until they were almost balls deep inside of it, right on top of it. But I knew I had ideas of what I wanted to do for it. And so when I started that process, I just kind of pulled from some of the lore that I had. So the original concept for it came for the aspect of I knew there was going to be a Spore Druid circle in the Underdark, but I kept asking myself, what if one of those people migrated from that Spore circle and went up top? What would be the reason they went up top, right? Why would they? I already knew that the boss of this region, what it was going to be, right? But maybe it was connected to that. From there, I said, okay, so the druid is in pursuit of some item crucial to the circle and was tasked with retrieving it. Or maybe that they struck it alone at the detriment of their fellow members shunning them, right? Either way, that individual went. Maybe that same druid became trapped while searching the last known locale, which would be the dungeon. Would that have an effect on the local region? All of those are like active world-building questions that I asked myself before I even knew what I wanted the theme to be. Like, I originally knew that the theme was going to primarily have something based on fungal growth, because that's, I don't know, I thought that was going to be really cool. And so that's when I knew I wanted to do something with the Spore Druids and have it mixed in and tie into the deeper goal and objective that the group was having. Because in this entire region, all of the, like, their entire growth in this region is meant to facilitate a level up. Because, like, this big boss fight that I'm amping up is meant to be the capstone of this arc, which is just them getting loot, getting more powerful, and playing Dungeons and Dragons, giving them an excuse to go delving in dungeons, being adventurers, right? And there's more lore building stuff that goes with that, but that's why I have these dungeons in the first place, right? But yeah, that's where the concept of that dungeon came from. And like I said before, it didn't have it planned out immediately. It was very much a slow process where it was just a couple times a day I would just ask myself questions in my mind whenever it would pop up. It's not like a omnipresent thought where it's like, I'm getting this all done now. is like there were sessions where I was freeballing it, but it came to me. Like, you have time as a dungeon master. But once I had the concept, like the theme of the dungeon, everything else kind of fell into place. I found monsters from the monster manual that aligned with it. I generally used, and if I didn't find monsters that like fit with the theme, with like the undergrowth, like the fungal undeath kind of theme, I found something that was like neutral or close to it. And even if you don't find something that's like super like matching, but you think is really dope, even in the DMG, it states it that you can just take that creature and just, give it a paint job. You can take that staff lock and just do whatever you want with it. And that's what I did. Like, some of the zombies that I have in there look like the fungus is puppeting them, and it's like it's following orders from some kind of hive mind, right? So you can make creatures fit in your campaign, or your setting or your dungeon, whatever you wanting. If you think they're cool, just have them in the fight. I think your players are going to resonate a lot more with something that you think is dope. Like, if you genuinely think a combat or like a creature is fun to fight or have, I think they're going to resonate with that a lot more, because they're going to see you're having a lot of fun, and vice versa. You know what I mean? But for my dungeon, I knew that I wanted to use Underdark, fungus, and large insects, because they're disgusting. And no one really wants to fight them. And like at a certain point, like when they get to like a higher level, like they're all level 6 right now, but when they get to a higher level, it's not gonna matter. Like, right? They're gonna look at an insect and like, oh yes, die. They're gonna breathe on it and they're gonna push over. So like there is a certain level of threat that they pose at this level that I wanted to instill, or at least utilize. Then again, when there's 8 of them, there's only so much you really can do. But the same process is true for my boss, the dungeon. I knew I wanted them to fight a dragon, because the name of the game is Dungeons and Dragons. I will be damned if I do not have a fucking dragon in that dungeon. It is the quintessential thing that I had to do. It's their first dungeon. I had to put one in there. I was putting one in there. And so, I mean, they're level 6. There's 8 of them. I mean, they can have a challenge. So I went and I found something that matched, like, especially with the spore theme. I went with a young green dragon. I gave it some layer actions, and I gave it which was pretty much just it summoning like fungal growth, and then it would use a legendary action at the end of somebody's turn, and it would explode all of those growths. And it could be varying effects, like some of the growths would heal, some of them would just inflict fire damage, and some would be like a poison. So it would keep the fight engaging. I also raised the AC to 20 and gave it like 200 HP, just that way the fight was, kind of there was chunkiness. It lasted a long time. It lasted 3 to 4 rounds. So it was a great time all the way around. But other than that, that's what having a theme does for you. Like, you can see what I meant when I said that everything falls to place when you have that theme. If you have that prevailing structure of what you want the dungeon to be, everything kind of falls in place from there. Just a disclaimer, if you're going to modify a stat block, just know it will change the difficulty of the fight. I mean, I run a lot of combat in my games, and I have plenty of stuff I can throw at them, because they are a party of 8 level 6 chaos gremlins. So I can be pretty brutal in terms of what I throw at them. So do what's best for your table. If you're unsure, I would say just leave the stat block alone, and then while you're in combat, see how things are progressing. If they're killing it quickly, you can always just change on the fly. The reason we have a DM screen is to create ambiguity. Like, they shouldn't know if it's near death. Like, some tables do the bloody mechanic like I do. So I let them know if they're at least halfway, which I think is fair. You know what I mean? Or, I mean, you can give them signs. Like, if they're close to, like, within 25% of dying, you can also give them that. But that ambiguity is there so that way you can keep the fight interesting. It keeps it interesting. Transparency is good, but it also kind of reveals your hand. If you keep it hidden, don't abuse that power, but it does make a more stimulating experience. Just don't go overboard with the mid-fight modifications, because they're not dumb. They'll eventually catch on. So you'll either end up with some dead PCs or just, you know what I mean, just measure the room and see if they're having fun. And at the end of the day, that's really what matters. Just try to let everyone have a moment. It won't always shake out like that, and that's okay. But if you have issues with your fights being dynamic, just give that method a shot. I think it works well 99% of the time. It does take some getting used to, so just trust me. I've killed some players with it. It sucks. Just be open with it. Try not to. You can't do that method and try to be brutal with it. It's more so you have to remember the goal is to give everybody a moment to make sure the threat is compelling and the reward feels right. If they steamroll it, sometimes that's only fun so many times, and after a while it just becomes boring. So make sure you remember what you're doing it for. All right, now moving on to the other point that I gauged earlier, which was how can you create something similar? Like, if you wanted to create a vibe like I had, I mean, you could obviously take like a carbon copy of it from what I've described, but let's say you're setting out to make a dungeon and you want to make something similar, or you're new time DM and you're really stressing it. Don't think you have to have it all planned out. Like I said before, you can go as you move along. Just first start with a theme. For me, it was the fungus and spores and the undeath. I knew I wanted to do something with that. So find out what you want to do. If you are dead set on, like, let's say doing fires, then or like having fire or renewal or like some broad theme, find creatures that fit with that. Right? Second thing, if specifically for a dungeon, personally, something like Donjon, I'll try to put a link in this video. Donjon is quite literally perfect. You could make, you could actually make an entire dungeon map, but personally, I am way too lazy for that. It gives you a layout quickly, even gives you some encounters based on what your party's at. I really don't use that. I mean, you can if you want. It really depends on how pressed for time you are. But really, I use it just to get the layout of the dungeon. You can give it some parameters and go from there. You can really tweak it to what you want. But once you have the layout of the dungeon, then the theme, everything else kind of falls in place. You can add layers, you can start setting traps, and you can pretty much go from there. All right. Now, after you got the layout of the dungeon and you have the theme for the dungeon, the rest kind of falls into place naturally, like as I've been saying. What I would recommend for you, especially, like, you don't have, like I said, you don't have to have it all planned out. Don't think you have to have like fucking mountains upon mountains of stuff ready. I would, at most, unless you're having a great time, like lore building or DM prepping, which I do personally, I would have at least 2 to 3, at most 3 encounters, just on the fly. Don't place them on the map, which, I mean, you can do if that's your jam, but I would just have them ready to go, specifically just to free ball in the moment, just in case things happen. I mean, think of it like a random encounter table. Like, I mean, people do that, but personally, it just feels artificial. I mean, you could make the argument that it's the same thing if you just place it arbitrarily, but it's more so about responding to what your players are doing, or having them make sense in the dungeon based on what your players are doing. Like if they make noises, or if they get stuck, or like right, if there's different instances where throwing an encounter in a situation can make it more tense, can give you more time to plan, can, especially if things go awry. But we'll get to that in a second. So after you have your encounters fleshed out, not like fleshed out, but you have them in accordance with your theme, you have your dungeon laid out, then you want to start playing out some traps. Like, keep in mind, right, the level of your characters. I mean, if you give them a 100-foot pit to fall in and they're level 1, I'm sorry, you have just made paste. I mean, I don't know what you want them to do. But keep it simple. Keep it simple, right? Just something that makes the terrain hazardous, like something to contend with. Not every encounter has to be a combat encounter, right? Some encounters can be traps, terrain, even dialogue with PCs or NPCs is an encounter, right? If you have different, you want to cycle these encounters, because the gameplay loop of Dungeons and Dragons is exploration, combat, role playing. You want to be cycling between all three. If you cycle and just have one in there, your game is going to be stale. So you want to be cycling through. You want to be inspiring all of your players to be wanting all three of those, and you want to be moving between them smoothly, right? And that's where having like that stuff in your back pocket kind of helps you with that gameplay loop. So after you have your traps, your layout, your theme, and some encounters, you're pretty much good to go. From there, you can start working in story bits. For me, I already had a general idea of what was going on first, right? With the boss of the region and the spore druids, and then I kind of made the story work as I went. And that's what helped influence the creation of my dungeon. Whether you start with like an arbitrary theme, let's say of renewal or death or light, right? I mean, that's pretty heavy for like level 1 adventurers, but who's to say? Like, I'm not gonna judge. But let's say that is your jam. You can start making a theme for that and then work backwards and then make it work. But if everything follows a theme, it's going to feel like it just works for your players. Like, they're not going to see all of your mind bits, you freaking out in your mind, you going off the cuff. They're just going to see a really cool, cohesive place that they're contending with and trying to fight for their life with. You know what I mean? And then moving on again, that same method of the on-the-fly adjustments, in my opinion, is crucial to being a dungeon master. For instance, I knew that they were going to fight that dragon at some point. It was only a matter of time. Like, I knew, like, I mean, if things didn't go as planned, like, I knew that I just put that in my back pocket and then I wait for them to fuck up. I say that, but it's not really that simple. But I mean, it kind of is and it kind of isn't. I knew they were going to find it because they had already tried several times to break these crystals, and they had made concerted efforts to try to figure out what the purpose of them was. I knew that they deduced what the purpose of those crystals was because they broke them, discerned an effect immediately based on the creature that was spasming, based on it being broken, and then they were dead set on trying to find the rest of them. Now, those crystals were like a side objective in the dungeon. Them just being in there to clear monsters was to get XP. I used milestone, but they cleared the dungeon. They get a level up. This is what I told them. So I knew that dragon fight was going to happen because they were pretty dead set on trying to figure out those crystals. But like, let's say if they never went down there, and if they never touched that crystal, that's okay too. That's when you take one of those back pocket encounters that you have ready and you kind of just throw it on them. And it gives them something to do, and it gives you time to plan. And like, okay, How do I make this make sense? Like, what's my next step? And you can kind of work your way on the cuff, and it makes it sense narratively, and it makes it sense smoothly, and you can tie it in, right? And even with those new encounters, sometimes that can just lead into different storylines entirely. It's crazy how much the game shifts based entirely upon one combat or entirely on one set of dialogue. So having those encounters ready at the go kind of just, gives you time. You're playing for time. You're not playing to win. Now, that's how I created my dungeon. I know it might seem like a lot. However, it was just spaced out over the course of a week or two, like I mentioned before. Occasionally thinking about it and writing certain bits down, and then eventually it turned into the dungeon that they're in currently, and they're having a blast. You don't have to have all the answers immediately. I want to emphasize that so much. And I hear the fears, and I read the comments on people's videos. You don't have to be Tony Stark to play this game. You just have to be willing to create. You just have to be willing to go off the cuff. You have to be willing to embrace the chaos, which is inevitably going to happen. Like, right, if you are dead set on going straight and only straight, you're eventually going to fly off a bridge. Like, you have to be willing to go with the curves. And that's, in my opinion, that collaborative storytelling bit is so much fun. That is what makes it fun. There are so many times where I'm at a gape. Where I don't know, where I just don't know what's happening because it's of what they're doing. And I just sit there, and those are my favorite moments playing this game. It is so much fun. And I want you guys, and I just hope that I can inspire somebody to, like, if they're ever being, like, putting themselves down or thinking that they can't do it, or that their DM style is too high maintenance and they can't do it, it's not that bad. It's really not. You can tell just such a compelling story, have such a fun game by just not having it all figured out. You can take your time with it. You can kind of coax into it. You don't have to have all the answers. Go as you go, and you got that. I would consider personally this a bullet point style. You have certain things ready. For me, like I have certain things ready in the background of my setting that I made, and then with that in mind, I can pull on that and improvise in real time by responding to my players' actions. Personally, I love it. I just talked about the collaborative storytelling part of it that it allows, but I just hope this helps someone out there. And again, I just hope it influences people to start making D&D content or feel like they can. But other than that, stay tuned, stay healthy, and just really remember, you guys can fucking do it. You guys are awesome. Have a good night. A little bit rambly, but hopefully you got the general premise of my DMing style down. Again, it's that bullet point style where you have set things in your pocket, a theme, some baseline lore for your setting, and then a couple of those encounters that you have ready, traps, whether they be traps, combat encounters, and or those role-playing encounters. But yeah, definitely, if you have all three of those, a good theme for your dungeon, and you're pretty quick on your feet with like your verbal descriptions of an area, you're going to be rock solid with this idea. And other than that, you'll be set. Now, in terms of this series, it's, like I said, I'm going to try to do it every week, or at least every week that we have a session. And even on the weeks that we don't really have sessions, I'll try my best to just go over what I'm creating or things that I am creating and why I'm creating it and pretty much how I am, and try to help you replicate it if you wish. Just trying to get feedback for my own campaign, learn some things from you guys, or hopefully I can teach you guys something. It'll be a nice back and forth, and it also lets me get my creative juices flowing. But yeah, guys, enjoy your time, and have a good night.